Okay. Okay, over to you, Stellah. Let me look for that attendance list.
Can I be going on? Thank you, thank you. So I'm so glad to be back again. Those of you who have been with us, I think you remember I was here again for the proposal, and I hope that you've been making some progress in your work. Today, I'm here once again, but with a different topic, that is quantitative research. As Madam Aurelia has just said, my name is Stellah. I call myself an education enthusiast, and my main aim is to simplify.
Sorry. I will reset it.
So as I was saying, my main aim is always to simplify these academic concepts as much as possible. So if you're here for the other session that I ran, that is the proposal, you know that the main concept, the main aim of my discussion is to make it as simple as possible, to narrow it in the simplest language possible. Once again, just to remind you, I like facilitating a very participative forum. So we are going to participate, and I hope that everyone is going to learn from each other. So if you allow me, then we can skip to understand exactly what is quantitative research. Okay, something is wrong with my screen. So just an outline of what you're going to be covering today. We look at definitions, we look at the characteristics of quantitative research, the reasons why you'd go on choosing a quantitative research, as well as the limitations of this approach. We are going to cover the quantitative research techniques, its sampling, the data analysis, how you present your results if you're looking at the quantitative research, and also how you carry on the discussion. So if you're very keen on the outline, you realize that you're covering the entire 5 chapters of the research. That is from the chapter 1 to chapter 5, where we have the discussions. So a research, as Madam Aurelia had said earlier, can either follow the qualitative, a quantitative, or a mixed method approach. So normally, I know that quantitative research is one of the most common that people use, but when you go to some disciplines, things like counseling, things like psychology, some people tend to find qualitative to be more common. Reason being that you tend to express the facts in a factual manner, not in terms of numbers. But a very common method that is coming on in the academic field today is a mixed method, whereby most people choose to apply both qualitative and quantitative. Just to give you a tip, when you're starting your work, it is very important to start thinking about your approach as early as when you're defining the problem. So once you have this idea, it is very important to start asking yourself, do I want to look at quantitative, qualitative, or mixed method? However, if you have no idea at starting, just relax. It is okay. It is normal that sometimes you have the idea, but you cannot tell which approach you're going to use. So if you cannot settle on that now when you are having the research idea, it's okay. Just proceed, and in the process, you might see if you're really going towards the quantitative, the qualitative, or the mixed method. Another tip that I would like to give you, when you find yourself with no idea at all what you're taking, always start with the mixed method. And what you're going to find out is that as you continue through your research, you might find that you're leaning more on the quantitative or more on the qualitative, or you're going to be okay with the mixed method. So it is very okay, it is very normal to be confused at the beginning, but as you proceed with your research, then you can start finding out or seeing if your work is quantitative, qualitative, or mixed method. Okay. Pardon me for a minute. I need to sort out this screen. Just a minute. All right, so I'm going to focus first of all in looking at the difference. Just a minute. Something is wrong.
Welcome, those who have joined us. Thank you for coming. We appreciate you. This is a participatory session, so feel free to share your insights, to ask questions, to to share, even to critique. That's how we learn. And you're most welcome, and we can know more about you. You can introduce yourself. Stellah, is there anywhere I could help?
No, I'm trying to set the screen. I think it's just disappeared.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah, just give me a second. I should be back on.
Okay, let's also know, what are your research interests? What are you researching about right now? You can put it on chat. You know, today people are very quiet on chat. What's happening? Are we cold? It's a bit cold weather.
How is the screen, Olivia?
We can see it.
Right. So can you continue?
Yes.
Okay, so as I was saying, the two most common are normally the qualitative and quantitative. Reason being that the mixed method is normally a combination of the two, that is the qualitative and quantitative. So just to run through into the difference between the two, I know that earlier you had a session where you covered the qualitative research, but for us to be able to cap to the quantitative, allow me to look at the difference between the two, then we can now concentrate on our specialization, that is the quantitative research. So when it comes to the qualitative research, normally we are focusing on an exploration of a theory, of an hypothesis, while the quantitative normally focuses on testing of hypotheses or theories. Qualitative, we tend to analyze by summarization, categorization, and interpretation, while for the quantitative, we are looking at analyzing the statistical analysis. The qualitative is expressed in terms of words, and that's why it normally presents in terms of prose. That is, what have you observed? You put it in words. But for the quantitative, we tend to express it in form of numbers, graphs, and tables. For the qualitative, we normally use few respondents, and as you continue, you're going to see why exactly that happens. While the quantitative, you have the option of having several or many respondents. The qualitative normally uses the open-ended questions, while the quantitative concentrates on closed-ended questions. So there is a reason why I'm talking about mainly. Reason being that in the qualitative, you can have closed-ended, but most of the questions tends to be open-ended. While still on the quantitative, you might need some open-ended questions to help you in maybe probing, maybe triangulation, but most of the questions tends to be closed-ended. For the qualitative, we tend to deal with understanding the context, and in most cases, it tends to be subjective in nature. But the quantitative, it deals with testing, measurement, replicability, and in this case, it tends to be quite objective in nature. So I want to believe that by just comparing the two, you can now remember what you covered in qualitative, and now you have an understanding of what are we moving at when we talk about a quantitative analysis. So the word that I want to be ringing in your mind as you continue is the numerical or numbers. Quantitative, it's about numbers. It's about a numerical expression of your research problem. So I have an example of, there's a researcher who wants to conduct the purchasing patterns of bread in the supermarket. So in the process of conducting it, when you're looking at the quantitative, someone will come and say that 20% of buyers bought a loaf of bread today. So you can see that we are conceptualizing, or we are concentrating on the number. How many people went to the supermarket and bought a loaf of bread? And in our case, it's 20%. But if you're looking at the qualitative approach, you have to come and explain. She bought the loaf of bread because she saw it on the thank you and thought of treating her family with a loaf of bread. So for qualitative, you're expressing it in terms of words. Quantitative, you go direct to the numerical explanation of the observation. But for the mixed approach, we are saying that you have both quantitative, so I'm bringing the number of 20%, and you also have the qualitative, whereby you're trying to explain how is that 20% coming in. So I think that brings in a clear understanding of what you mean as quantitative research and qualitative. But like I said, the main word that should be ringing in your head is the word numbers, numerical expression. So quantitative research, basically, the quantitative research, we are talking about numbers. It's a way of analyzing your research in terms of numbers. So what characteristics makes a research to be quantitative research? The first one is the use of a structured, so it's a use of structured tools such as questionnaires, such as polls and surveys. The second characteristic is the use of a significant sample size to represent the target population. So if I was to take you back to the differences that we discussed for qualitative and quantitative, we said that qualitative, we tend to have a small number of respondents, while quantitative, we are looking at a large number of respondents. So the reason being that your resources are limited. You don't have the time, you don't have the money. So it means that even if you have a large number of respondents, you need to come down to a significant sample size. And that is a main characteristic of a quantitative research. The third one, the main data collection instruments that are used are close-ended questions. We just discussed that one. Then the factors that are related to the research are studied prior to collecting the data from the participants. So if I was to take you back to discussions that you've had earlier, before you move to collection of data, before you get to the field, we normally have a literature review, whereby you want to look at the different studies on your main research problem. So that becomes one of the characteristics of the quantitative research, whereby you need to have some prior information before you go to the field to collect the data. Then the data is presented in terms of tables, charts, and graphs. And finally, the results of a quantitative research, they are normally generalizable. So what do we mean by that? When you want to discuss a qualitative research, and I'll take you back to an example that you had for the loaf of bread. If I went to a supermarket, I assume I want to go to a Naivas supermarket in Kenya, and I want to look at how are people buying bread. So if I want to look at the qualitative, I'll come and say that the ladies bought the loaf of bread from the queue because they found that they wanted to treat their families. So it means that the information I get cannot really be generalized in all the supermarkets in the world. This one being that my focus is what I've observed in Naivas supermarket in Kenya. However, if I come and say that 20% of respondents purchased the loaf of bread, it means that this 20% can be generalized in different other areas. So quantitative allows us to generalize our findings in different areas and different places, while for the qualitative, in most cases, you cannot really generalize because what you observe or what you find out are normally specific to your target population or the target area that you're studying. So I'm going to pose a question.
Sorry, yes. Stellah, are you presenting because the slides are not on?
Okay, just. Can you hear my voice?
Very well.
Okay, so let me, is it clear now?
We can see a slide there.
Okay, so sorry for that. I think today my technology is just all over the place. All right, so I've posted a question there and I think we can be discussing as I set it out. I know that most of us are researchers or we are doing some form of research. So who thinks that the research you're conducting is quantitative in nature? And if you think it's quantitative, what characteristics of your research makes you think that it is quantitative? So I'll repeat, among us, we're doing some research of some form. So the question is this: who thinks that the research they're conducting is quantitative? You can tell us the problem. And if you think it's quantitative, what specific characteristics makes you think that the nature of your research is quantitative? So over to you, Tim. Let's see, maybe 2 people will be enough. So let me have someone unmute and you can have the discussion. Somebody? Anyone?
Hello, this is a learning space, so feel free. There is a JK.
Nancy here.
Okay.
I think for me, inherently, because I am maybe it's
hello,
also
hi,
biased.
can you hear me?
Can you hear me? I was
Yes, hi.
First, let Nancy go first, then
I hope
we'll
I
have.
can be heard. I think the internet has it. Yes, I can.
Please raise your hand so that we know who is talking. I think Nancy is talking right now. Then just raise your hand. I can see JK's hand is up. And I know there is someone else who was talking. So Nancy, go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. I just barged in. So I think for me, inherently, because my background is numbers and finance, so I am inclined towards quantitative because of also what I want to achieve after. I want the issue of generalizability of the results that I wish, that the results of my study. So it's quantitative.
Okay, okay. So the main characteristics he has pointed out, it's the numbers and the generalizability that makes it to be quantitative. And I tend to agree with that. So let's have someone else.
Jemima, you want to go? Please, you can also put on chat if you don't want to unmute yourself. Jemima Kuta, you want to go? JK, please answer.
Sorry, I got disconnected a minute ago. Sorry. My research is on media. I mentioned it. I believe that it is quantitative in nature because first of all, it's a correlational study. I am not looking at I'm not looking at people telling me their stories about the experiences with social media. I'm looking at how people, the patterns that people are using. What sites are they using? What kind of activities are they doing on those sites? And what are their feelings when it comes to depression and on the depressive scale, basically. So I believe that my correlational research falls under quantitative, and it can also be generalized because sorry? Somebody is speaking.
Can we take 1 minute and just mute yourself, please? If you're not talking, just click that mute button. We love your voice, but not now. Please just.
Okay, I think that those are my reasons for thinking that my work is quantitative, basically. Over to you.
Okay. So the point that she's brought in, it's a correlation which, don't worry, we are going to discuss that. The point of generalization, it's still another characteristic she has brought in. And I don't know, is there anyone who has about the feelings? Anyone would like to comment on that?
Jemima, please mute.
Mommy.
All right, so I think we can move on. So we've talked, we can see that for most of the researchers who are going the quantitative way, one of the main things that they're following is the fact of generalizability and the types of, and the fact that they're going to have a numerical representation. So those are the main characteristics that makes our research to be called quantitative research. So then the question is this: why would someone choose a quantitative research? What are the main reasons that make someone move to quantitative research? The first one, I think we just said that it allows for generalizability, or for you to generalize your information. And if you're not getting this word, like we said, if you're going to conduct your study, assume that you're doing your study in a country, in Uganda. The fact is that the results that you find in Uganda can be generalized or can be applied in another area, talk about Kenya, or another time period, talk about 3 years from now, and what have you. So the fact that you studied social media behaviors in Uganda, the information you get, it can be replicated or can generalize that those are the behaviors of social media users in Uganda. So basically, quantitative research enables you to generalize your information. And if I was to bring a difference of the quantitative and qualitative, if I want to conduct the behaviors of kindergarten students in a public school in northern Kenya. So if I want to go there and observe how they behave, the fact is that I cannot assume that how these kindergarten children are behaving in Uganda or in northern Kenya is the same way that they're going to behave in northern Uganda or northern Tanzania. So basically, qualitative, they're not generalizable, but quantitative, you can generalize your findings. Still, another reason you're going to be choosing quantitative is the fact that it allows objectivity and accuracy. The fact that quantitative is a very functional concept in research. So you're going to present what you find. There is no close contact of the researcher and the participants. It does not allow for the emotions to come in the research. So whatever you present in quantitative research is based on facts, is based on what you found out, what you've analyzed. So basically it tends to be quite objective as compared to the qualitative. Then you tend to apply standards that allow replicability, meaning that another researcher can use the same standards you use, they can use the same concept, the same techniques to conduct a similar study somewhere else. Then it allows the summarization of information and reduces bias, since you tend to keep a distance from the study subjects. So when you talk about a distance, assume that you want to find out the social media usage in a country. So the fact that you're going to be giving questionnaires or you want to do an interview, it means that you don't have a close contact with the study subject. It means that you don't have the part to put in emotions in the study. So in this case, you're going to reduce a personal bias, which tends to be quite large when it comes to the qualitative research. So then, what would make you not go for quantitative research? Which are some of the reasons that would make you think, no, maybe I should go the qualitative way and not quantitative. The first one is that when you apply the quantitative, we said that you tend to not have a contact with your research or your participants. So in this case, you might miss on some contextual details. So if I want to find out the behavior or the feelings of people or opinions of people, the fact that I'm going to be factual, I'm going to collect my data using questionnaires or interviews and just analyze what they give me, mean that I don't have the whole aspect to question them, to observe the behaviors, to put in your emotions into it. It means that in some cases, you might miss out on some contextual aspects as compared to qualitative. The second one, quantitative, is quite rigid. Like we said, you normally follow some standards. You normally follow a certain system when you're conducting quantitative research. You don't have the chance to play around with your research, to play around with your questions, to play around with your participants. So in this case, you have to follow the specific standards that you've established at the beginning of your study. So if you say that you're going to carry out a research using questionnaires among 50 participants, then even if you went to the field and found that these 50 participants tend to have a negative response, you don't have the choice to change on the field, whereby you say that if they're all saying no, let me add the number so that I can see if I'll get a yes. You don't really have that chance when it comes to quantitative research, so it can be quite rigid, unlike the qualitative research. Thirdly, you tend to have a structural bias still when it comes to developing your standard questions, reason being that you cannot really change as you want. So what you're going to decide is going to be your research technique, has, or your research design has to move on to the end. You don't have that area or that allowance to change for you to get exactly what you need. So in this case, you can have a structural bias. Then when it comes to finding the attitudes, behaviors, and things like opinions, it tends to bring in less detail because you don't have a direct contact with your respondents. Then it tends to be less elaborate when it comes to human perception, and the fact that you are using their natural environment. You're sending questionnaires, you're having interviews, you don't have the chance to go and observe or touch or ask other questions that can help you understand attitudes in your research. Then it means that you might really not have the natural results as compared to qualitative. So once again, I'm going to pose the same question. If you're conducting a qualitative research, we just had two people tell us they're doing quantitative, but I believe some of us, they think or they're planning to do a qualitative research. So if you're conducting a qualitative, let's have two people tell us, why do you think you chose qualitative and not quantitative? So now you're looking at the people who are doing the quantitative research. What made you go for the qualitative and not the quantitative way of research? So maybe we can have two people participate, then we continue. Somebody?
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, I'm Chris Limo. I'm doing, mine is quality. I'm conducting a qualitative research. And why I think I did not go the quantitative way is because I want to get perspectives. I'm doing, the role of family from the perspective of the respondents. So why it was qualitative is because I'm sure I'll get different conversations going from different people. And because I can't get a standardized answer, I wouldn't even know what to look for because it's their perspectives that they are going to share with me. So that's why I think it's qualitative. And because I wanted their perspectives, that's why I chose not to do quantitative.
Thank you. So what Chris is telling us is that since he's conducting the role of family, and in his case, he's focusing on the perspective of the family, not what he's heard or what he has read to be the role of the family. So the fact that he wants to attain in-depth information from the families for them to guide him, he felt that the qualitative research is the best way to go. So in such an example, and I thank you, Chris, for bringing this. When you talk about the role of family, someone would have chosen the quantitative research because you already have the structured responses that you think are the likely roles of the family. So what you want to find out, are they the ones or not, empirically, by testing your hypothesis. But for him, he wants them to guide him into the theory. He wants them to guide him into the hypothesis. So in this case, he's not testing the hypothesis, but he's developing the hypothesis. So that's one of the things that we realized at the beginning. He's trying to form the hypothesis, so he goes on and conducts a qualitative research. Somebody else?
Anyone? This is a learning space. Feel free to share.
Do you have someone else?
No one is doing a qualitative study or with a qualitative component.
So I think already this satisfies what we said at the beginning, that majority of researchers are going the quantitative way. And that's a question we should be asked. Yeah, it seems that the biggest percentage of researchers choose quantitative over qualitative. I think you can see from the example of this group, whereby you have only one person who's doing qualitative and most of us are doing the quantitative. So if you allow me, I want to look at the quantitative research techniques. Which are the research techniques that are involved in quantitative research? The first one is the quantitative research normally involves asking of questions to a sample of respondents. Like we said, the reason being that you're looking at a very large number of respondents. So you tend to sample them and you ask the question using tools like the polls and so when you're applying surveys, you can use the cross-sectional survey or longitudinal surveys in a quantitative research. The cross-sectional surveys, you tend to look at what is happening at one particular period of time, where longitudinal, you are focusing over a long period of time. So an example of the piece of bread or the loaf of bread that we discussed earlier, for the cross-sectional survey, you might go to the supermarket and you want to find out the purchasing patterns of bread today. What is the current purchasing pattern of bread, maybe in Kenya? But if you're looking at the longitudinal in a quantitative research, you might want to look over a period of time. What has been the purchasing pattern of bread in Kenya over the last 6 months? So that brings in the aspect of longitudinal survey. So in a quantitative research, for you to carry out a survey, you can use the two methods, cross-sectional or longitudinal. Secondly, you can use the correlational research, which I think one of us should have been Nancy, or if I can remember well, she said that she's looking at correlational quantitative research. So this is where you're trying to establish a relationship between two entities or two variables, whereby you determine how one impacts on the other. So I have an example of a quantitative correlational research, whereby I'm looking at the relationship between stress and depression. So in this case, I have two variables, stress and depression. So for me to find out the relationship, for me to find out what happens between the two, then I can carry out a quantitative research that is correlational in nature. The second one could be a relation between activities in a third grade class and its students' performance. So when you're trying to look at two variables, how do they relate to each other? That becomes a correlational quantitative research. So let me get one example as we move on. Once again, let's participate to avoid slipping off the discussion. So one more correlational example. Somebody kindly unmute. An example of a correlational quantitative research title, someone?
Let's hear people. This is a learning space, no judgment. I think you also learn more when you share. So feel free. JK?
I tapped mine on the chat. It's about the use of social media in depression. I was the one who was doing the correlational research. So my topic is on the use of social media and depression. So I think those two are closely related one way or another.
Perfect. Perfect example, which is practical because someone is doing it, where she's looking at social media and depression. So in this case, now we can understand exactly why she said that she chose the quantitative way. She's carrying a correlational research between two variables, that is social media and depression. And it sounds quite interesting. I hope one of these days you'll share the findings with us. I'm actually anxious to know exactly what is the relationship.
We can have a meeting after this and talk about it. I actually need a little bit of help.
Excellent, excellent. So the third one is the causal comparative research, that is the quasi-experimental research. And I found out that a number of us are doing the quasi-experimental, if they can follow the examples that we had in the earlier discussions. So in this case, the researchers, they tend to use the cause effect of the variable. So you have the two variables, that is your independent or independent, or whichever two variables that you have in your study. So for you to conduct the cause effect, then you tend to carry out a quasi-experimental, noting that in this case, you do not manipulate your independent variable. So you want to observe exactly what is happening without manipulation of the independent variable, as you tend to do in other studies. So an example of the quasi-experimental quantitative research is the impact of drugs on a teenager. So in this case, you want to study how are the drugs affecting the teenager, but you're not going to be manipulating the drugs. So in this case, you cannot go giving the teenagers drugs for you to study it. So you don't manipulate the independent, but you want to study the cause effect. How are the drugs affecting teenagers? The second one could be the effect of substantial food provision in villages of Africa. So you don't manipulate the food provision, but you want to go to the field and find out how does it affect the villages in Africa. Then the fourth technique of research in quantitative research is experimental, which is the main experimentation that happens in the laboratory. And this is quite common in natural sciences. So still on the quantitative research, let's look at sampling. How do you apply sampling when it comes to quantitative research? So if you're keen, you find out that now we are moving to the chapter 3 part of the research design, but in this case, focusing on quantitative research. So remember, we said that quantitative research normally uses a large number of people. So in most cases, due to limitation of time, limitation of money, you cannot go on studying the entire population. So you might find yourself, if you're doing a quantitative research, you need to sample your work. So for quantitative research, you have the option of using probability or non-probability sampling. So I've had some cases where people think that when you're doing a quantitative, then you should use a probability sampling and not non-probability, which is not true. So even if it's quantitative, you still have the option of using a random sampling, like the simple random, the stratified, the systematic, and cluster, or you can use a non-random, things like convenience, snowballing, or purposive sampling. So it's up to you to choose which one favors the kind of research that you're conducting. So I have an example of a quantitative research there. Sorry. So an organization wants to conduct a customer satisfaction survey. So what this organization does, it comes up with a customer satisfaction survey template. Just a minute. Then in this survey, they're going to collect quantitative data whereby they look at variables like the quality of the products, pricing, customer service, and what have you. And for them to collect the data, they use things like the Net Promoter Score that shows the response of customers to your product. They can use a matrix table and what have you. So in this case, if you look at the example, if you're an organization, it is not possible to go to all your customers. So at some point, you might have to sample. Which customers do I want to focus, or which customers do I use to get my data? So once again, I'm going to pose a question. Assume you're the researcher who has been sent by an organization to carry out a customer satisfaction survey. Assume it's Unilever. We have so many customers that use Unilever products. So for you to conduct the survey and you want to use the quantitative method, which type of sampling would you choose to use as a researcher? Unilever has contacted you to carry out a customer satisfaction survey of its products. Which sampling method would you apply to conduct this quantitative research? So let me have two people. What do you think? Which method would you use? Two people?
We post or
Pardon, please?
Non-probability.
Non-probability, why?
I think non-probability, I'll ask the customers who have bought the goods and find out the experiences. So that will be.
Okay. So he's saying that for him, he'll choose non-probability method, whereby he'd use the customers that he's able to access. So yes, that is right, because as a researcher, he sat down and realized that for me to get these customers, they're those that are coming in the store. So for me, I would choose the non-probability. I think that is what she's saying. Let me have one more person who has a different opinion. Anyone who would use a different method to reach or to sample these customers? Somebody?
Okay,
Come on, you're a group of researchers.
I'm going to make a wild guess.
Yes.
I think I would go for probability sampling, maybe the simple random sampling.
Yeah.
So for example, I will go to an outlet where Unilever has its products. Let's say, for example, Naivas.
Yeah.
And I want, maybe I'm looking at toothpaste from Unilever. So every customer who actually buys a Unilever toothpaste is the one that I get feedback from. So I think that's a simple random sampling, because anybody anybody who buys a Unilever product there is a candidate for me. I am ready to interview them and get their feedback. So I think for me that would be probability in a way, I guess. I'm not sure.
Okay, okay. Anyone wants to critique that? She's saying that she would use probability, and she's saying that if you go to a supermarket like Naivas, you know that any customer that moves in, it's a potential customer of Unilever. So she feels that it could be a simple random sampling. Can you have someone who would want to critique that? She says she's not sure. Anyone would want to critique? Somebody?
Hello, hello. We are very quiet. Let's hear from someone. We can just, you can guess, you can just give an idea. I think you learn more when you try, when you participate. What should you do if you, she said random sampling to find which is applied at Naivas, eh?
Yes. All right. So I think if I was to respond to her, I would say that yes, you can use probability. However, the approach that you bring whereby the customers coming in are potential customers, I would not really call that a simple random sampling. It becomes more of non-probability. However, I still agree that there is the option of using probability sampling, whereby you can use the stratified, or you can choose any other method, and you can also mix the probability and non-probability. So in this case, you could have chosen the simple random sampling to select Naivas, but once in Naivas, you can get your participants using convenience. Which customer is coming in? I'm going to interview them. I'm going to survey them. So there is an aspect of probability and non-probability in your response. But it's good trying. At least now you understand the two options that you can use in quantitative research. And just to remind you, yes, you can combine the two. It is very possible and very common to use both non-random and random, like I've just mentioned. Okay, so after you've gone to do your sampling, then, and you've collected your data, there is a data analysis that happens in quantitative research. So this is one of the main areas that differentiates quantitative research and qualitative research. Once you have the data, how do you analyze this quantitative research? So this analysis, it helps you as a researcher to move from a mass data and to make insightful or meaningful insights from what you've collected. So when you have quantitative data, the first thing that you need to do is to conduct a preparation of your data. So you need to verify your data. Remember that you just sent your questionnaires out, or you sent your research assistants to go and do the interviews. So you do not have a contact with your respondents because you're following the quantitative way of research. So before you start analyzing, it is very, very important that you validate your data. Look out for fraud. Was the research really conducted? If you wanted to find out to conduct interviews, you sent out your research assistants. Were the interviews conducted per se? Were the questionnaires filled, or they sat in a room and did the filling? You need to find out the screening. Were the people who were expected to be interviewed, were they the ones who were interviewed? You want to find out the completeness, while your research instruments field to completeness. Once you validate your data, then you need to do some editing, whereby you look out for possible errors. You want to look out for possible outliers. So an outlier, I'll give an example whereby you have your questionnaire and you sent it to a kindergarten class. So you wanted to find out maybe the performance of students in a high school. Let me go to a high school. So when you took the questionnaires to the students, and the first question you're asking is age. Age is numerical in nature. So assume you find a student has filled that their age is 45 years or 65 years. So when all of them are 13, 14, 16, 13, 14, 16, all of a sudden you find a response where someone is saying they're 65 years. So that becomes an outlier. Or someone comes and says that they are 1 year old and it's in high school. So from a researcher's point of view, you need to make some professional judgment. In a high school, we don't expect someone who is 65 years. And if they are, you might want to question or to find out further why or how. So when you have these outliers, you need to mark them, then you can follow on them later. Then the next very important part in quantitative research is coding, whereby you assign your values, the values to the responses. So coding normally helps us to analyze our data. And the good news is, as much as we have all those big names in quantitative analysis, the softwares that we have today have been able to analyze the data for us. So for you to put in your software, assuming it's SPSS, then you have to do the coding. For example, if I want to look at the gender of students, I might have female and male. So for me to analyze this data in a quantitative manner, it is very hard for me to use the female and male. So what happens is I might have to assign a number. Remember, it's quantitative, so it's numerical. I might have to assign a number to female. So assume I say female is number 1 and male is number 2. So when I do my analysis, then it becomes much easier for me to interpret, because I'll be looking at what percent is number 1, that is female, and what percent is number 2, that is female. So for you to analyze your quantitative research, the data coding is a very important aspect. However, before you rejoice that you have softwares to do the analysis for you, remember that statistics have a main, they have a main, a term that goes on that: rubbish in, rubbish out. So whatever you put in the software, that is what you get in. If it is rubbish, you get rubbish. If it is clean work, it's going to give you clean work. So still, before you go to the software, you need to have the basis of your research and to understand exactly what are you feeding in the software. So when you're analyzing research in quantitative nature, we have 2 levels of analysis. We have the descriptive analysis and the inferential analysis. The lower levels of studies, people doing certificate, maybe diploma, you find that some people might use just the descriptive analysis, which is okay. But as you go higher in your study, you're doing your undergraduate, you're doing your master's, your professional, then it means that for you to give enough information, for you to give enough interpretation, you must include descriptive and inferential analysis. Descriptive analysis is normally the first level of analysis that helps a researcher to summarize their data and to find patterns. So examples of descriptive analysis will be mean. If I want to find out the average of my responses, the median, what are the mid values, the mode, which values tends to appear most times, the percentages, that is the proportions, and the frequencies, that is assigning numbers to your responses. So an example, if I go down to the age, that is the female and male, I might want to use percentages, the proportion. What percent of my respondents were female? What percent of my respondents were male? So that is the first level of analysis. And this normally happens when, before you go to the inferential, you need to conduct the descriptive analysis. And these ones, they're the main ones that we use if you're conducting quantitative research. So the descriptive statistics, they normally give you an absolute number. Like I said, 20%. Number 3, frequency of 5, they give an absolute number, but they don't give you a reasoning behind the number. So if I come and say that 20% of my respondents were female, there is no reasoning that comes in behind the 20%. It's just an absolute number. It's just 20%. Then remember, not all descriptive statistics fits all studies. So if you pick a paper or you pick a research that did a mean or a median, it does not mean that you can replicate the same directory you're studying. So you have to choose carefully depending on the kind of study you're conducting. And I've given an example. If I'm looking at gender, you can use percentages to give you information on who are females and who are males. However, you cannot really use mean. Yes, mean or average, it's a descriptive study. But when I apply it in gender, I find a mean of 1, that is female, or a mean of 2, it does not really communicate a lot. So you have to choose very carefully which descriptive statistic you need to use in your research. Then it is related more to the sample and might not really be generalized. So if my study in high school A showed that 50% are male, 50% are female, it does not really mean that if I go and do it in high school B, the same will happen. So it does not really bring in the aspect of generalization as much as the inferential statistics does. Then finally, for the descriptive analysis, we tend to analyze one variable at a time. If it is age, it is age alone. If it is gender, it is gender alone. So you cannot bring in different variables at the same time. So the second one, which is the most, I say it's the most interesting because it communicates more about your study. So this is when you start seeing the whole reason why you are doing your research. This is where the whole information you've been looking at starts coming in. That is the inferential analysis. So this is more complex as compared to the descriptive, and it normally shows a relationship between various variables. So unlike the descriptive, which is univariate, when it comes to inferential, then you can bring in different variables. You can bring in an independent variable and dependent variable together. So if I take the example that you had of social media and depression, when you're looking at the descriptive analysis in quantitative research, you might have to look at social media alone, what percentage is using, what is the average usage, and what have you, then depression alone. But inferential, now you're bringing in the two together. You're bringing the social media, you're bringing in the depression together, and that's why I'm saying it's the most interesting. In my opinion, I find it to be most interesting because now you're able to see your research, you're able to see your findings, you're able to feel the opinions that you had or the hypotheses that you had. So in this case, you can generalize your predictions. So what I find to be the relationship between social media and depression in Kenya, I can apply that maybe in Uganda or Tanzania. So when it comes to inferential, now the aspect of generalization for quantitative research comes in. So some of the examples you might be using are things like correlation, things like regression, things like the ANOVA, and what have you. And at this point of inferential analysis, this is where we are not testing the hypothesis. So earlier when you started, you talked about testing hypothesis. And like I said, no, this is the fun of your research. Now you want to start proving, to start accepting or rejecting your hypothesis. This happens at the inferential part of your quantitative research. So once again, remember that your research questions are what determines the type of analysis you use. So you cannot just look at what other researchers have done and carry it to your research. You have to look clearly, what are your research questions? What are your hypotheses? Then that can direct you to find out which inferential statistic you need to use. A person using correlation, it could be different from the one who's using regression. Someone who's using ANOVA is different from someone who's using a t-test. So always look at your research questions, look at your hypotheses for you to determine which inferential statistic you need to use. So I have a tip. I know that some students tend to get confused at this stage, but before you start even thinking about which inferential statistic you're going to use in your quantitative research, the main common ones, the most that most of us are going to use, I can assure you on this, they are the Pearson correlation. Pearson correlation shows you the strength between your independent and dependent variables. The cousin to Pearson correlation is the Spearman, but Spearman is normally qualitative, but for us, because we are quantitative researchers, then you're going to be using the Pearson correlation. Regression, which is close to correlation, but in this part, you want to look at the amount of variable that is explained by the two variables. So you want to find out how much of your dependent variable can be explained by your independent variable. So just to bring it home closer, if you have the social media and depression, I want to look at what level or to what extent is depression influenced by social media. That is when your regression comes in. We have the t-test, which shows the statistical difference between two means. The z-test, which focuses on larger size of sample as compared to t-test, and ANOVA, which now brings in 3 or more means as compared to t-test. So my tip is this: when you're confused about which inferential statistic to use in your quantitative research, before you start running over other complex concepts, start from here. Then from here, you can tell yourself if to move further or to stick there. These are the most used, and I can assure you that 99% of us are going to be using at least one of these inferential statistics in your quantitative research. So someone will ask, how do I know which method to use? How do I know which statistic to use? The first thing that should guide you is your research question. And I've given an example. Someone comes to the research question. I want to examine, that's an objective, sorry, not a research question, but you can change to a research question, to examine the extent to which unions affect the remuneration of teachers. So the fact that you have the word extent should tell you that you want to find out the level, you want to find out the weight of the unions and remuneration. So in this case, this should guide you that you're going to be using a regression analysis. However, if I want to establish the effect of unions on remuneration, that's a relationship matter. Is it positive? Is it negative? Is there a relationship or there's no relationship? Then that should guide you that the first thing you want to find out is a correlation analysis. You can see in my case, my research question or my objective has guided me to choose which statistic to use in the quantitative research. The second one, what type of data do you have? So we have different types of data. You could be having the ordinal data, you could be having the nominal data, you could be having the interval. So the type of data you choose should be telling you which statistic to use. And I'll just look at one example. If you're looking at ordinal data, that is things like opinions, things like perceptions. And I've said, think about the Likert scale, where you say, I strongly agree, I disagree, and what have you. So this should tell you that the frequency you can use is mode and median and not the mean. The type of inferential you could use could be something like the Wilcoxon match test. So the type of data you're going to use should guide you to know the statistic that you apply. So I'll advise you once you get the slide, you can look at the other examples. Then the third thing that should guide you, what assumptions are you making in your study? So if you have the assumptions of normality, then it means that definitely you have to use a z-test or a t-test. But if it's non-normal, then you can use ANOVA. So there is no, you can apply ANOVA when you're assuming that your data is normal. And there's no, you can use a t-test or a z-test if you're saying that your data is not normal. So very important, always ask yourself, what assumption are you making in your data for you to choose which type of inferential statistic you're going to apply. So once you've done your analysis, for the results, if it's quantitative or qualitative, it also determines how you present your results. So for the first time, remember that quantitative, we said that it's normally numerical it's normally numerical, meaning that you present it in terms of graphs, in terms of tables, and in terms of charts. So you always avoid making it as textual as possible. So if you're doing qualitative research, your analysis tends to be more textualized. So you try to explain using words. You're trying to explain using words. But for quantitative, we tend to use few words, as few words as possible. So in this case, present your data using graphs, using tables, and using charts, and it has to follow a very precise format. It has to be quite logical, and it has to be quite sequential. So these are the factors that we discussed earlier when you're talking about quantitative and qualitative. There is a standardized way of presenting quantitative. So you want to put it in graphs and you want to be as objective as possible. So quantitative, you don't have the option to put in your voice, to be subjective, to say about your opinion or what you think. You want to present the facts. What have you seen? What have you observed? Full stop. That is quantitative research. Then once you have your results, finally, in your research paper, how you discuss also determines if it's quantitative or qualitative. So the quantitative, you tend to discuss based on the research questions or the hypothesis. So remember, in your data analysis, when you're doing the ANOVAs and the thesis, you tested your hypothesis. So now this is where you come and see, are you really accepting or are you rejecting? This is where you want to discuss every hypothesis at a time. If you had 4 of them, you have to conclude, you have to discuss each hypothesis. And at the end of it all, you have to see if you're truly accepting, given the particular confidence level, or if you're rejecting based on the particular confidence level. So then from there, you can say, well, your predictions true. That is based on if you're accepting or if you're rejecting the null hypothesis. Then you need to describe the emerging trends and to explain the statistical insignificant findings that you found out. So for example, if you came to your question of social media and depression, sorry for using the example that you're given. So you want to find out, if I came and found out that the relationship between social media and depression is insignificant after doing my analysis, then at the discussion, then you might want to explain this particular observation. You want to explain why has this really come up? When you're doing hypothesis, when you're stating hypothesis, we say that there is a significant relationship between social media and depression. But after analysis, realize it's not significant at all. So in the discussion, then you need to explain that. You need to explain why or how have you found that it is statistically insignificant. Then how does that mean? What does that mean for your result? Does it mean that social media does not have an effect on depression? Does it mean that, yes, it has an effect, but it is not significant? You need to explain that in the discussion. Then finally, you need to describe the limitations and unavoidable biases that happen when you're carrying out your study. And this is what now helps to explain the statistical aspect of your discussion, that yes, we found out that social media is it has a significant relationship with depression. However, we found out there was this and this limitation. So you need to explain that on your discussion, which happens in chapter 5. And that sums out quantitative research from chapter 1 to chapter 5 of your study. Thank you for listening.
Wow. Thank you so much, Stellah, for taking us through that rich session. I'm sure you all agree it was rich. And we've passed time a little bit, but we have some questions on chat. So I'm going to read them out, and we'll also have maybe 2 or 3 questions, and then we can call it a day. So we have Mudomi Munywa asking, does quantitative and qualitative studies only apply to social science research? My research involves determining wind speeds of various towns in Kenya. Is this research qualitative, quantitative, mixed, or both? Mixed of both. So there is that one. Then there is any details about chi-square test and when to use it? The rest is appreciation. How do you deal with challenges that come with self-report from participants? I think those are the 3 questions. The rest is congratulations. Then does anyone have 2 more questions from anyone who wants to speak, please? Just feel free to unmute and just ask. Then she can answer all of them together and then we can close.
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask if I'm doing inferential statistics, what would make me to do univariate and multivariate, or choose bivariate instead of univariate? I still don't know what makes that decision. Use either univariate or bivariate analysis with the multivariates. Thank you.
Anyone else who wants to unmute and speak? One more chance for someone else.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay. In the first place, thank you very much to the presenter. I really enjoyed the presentation. Then I want to find out something in chapter 4, the presentation, presenting the data, using either table, graphs, or charts. Can we use two, or let's say, can we use the tables and graphs at the same time? Or if we decide to use tables, we should use tables throughout. If you also want to use charts, you use chart throughout. If you want to use graphs, you use graphs throughout. That is my question too. Thank you.
Do you allow a third question? Good evening. I just need a little bit of clarification, and I'll put it on the chart, whereby I'm asking to get it clear how you tally or match up an objective to its data analysis technique from the objectives level, so that I know as I have this objective, this is most likely the technique that I will need to analyze my data. Did you get it?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
There's someone who is asking, finally, there are people who want your email, Stellah. And then there's Hasina who is asking, mixed method, is it a combination of both quantitative and qualitative? Stellah, I think you can answer.
Okay, okay. So I'll start from the first one of the wind speed. So from my analysis, for me, it feels to be more quantitative than qualitative because we are measuring a numerical value, that is the wind speed in different towns. So the fact that it's more of a measurement, for me, I feel it's more of a quantitative to qualitative. And I don't know if anyone has a different opinion. Someone asked about the wind speeds in towns, and I feel that it's quantitative because you're dealing with a number. It's numerical in nature because you need to measure the different wind speeds. So if someone has a different opinion, you might tell us at the end. Then the second one, someone asked about the chi-square. So why I did not mention the chi-square, it's because chi-square happens more on the qualitative research than quantitative. So yes, it is an inferential statistic, a very good one, and it is always my go-to when you're doing a qualitative research. Then someone asked about the inferential statistic, how you choose to use univariate, multivariate, or bivariate. So this is dependent upon the data that you're conducting. So you tend to choose depending on the number of variables that you have. So univariate, you're looking at only one variable. And this normally happens with the descriptive analysis. So almost all studies can have an univariate, whereby you have the independent variable alone, then the dependent variable alone, and maybe the intervening variable alone. So you're looking at one variable at a time. Bivariate, it's where you have two variables at the same time. So you want to study maybe you're independent and dependent alone at the same time, that becomes bivariate. But multivariate, it's where you have many variables at the same time. So if I want to study the dependent, the independent, maybe my independent has two aspects, or maybe I want to bring in a moderating variable at the same time. So that becomes a multivariate. So a good example, just to be fast, if I have the social media and depression, If I look at social media alone, I'll go for the univariate. If I want to look at social media and depression, I'll look at bivariate. If I want to look at social media, depression, government policy, and maybe another variable, then that becomes multivariate. So multivariate, the main common statistic that we use is normally the MANOVA, because it allows you to bring in many variables, while ANOVA has only 2 variables. So someone asked about chapter 4, if you can use the tables and graphs together. Yes, and I advise you to do that. If you use tables alone, I don't feel that it brings much information. So it is advisable that you have the tables and graphs together, or tables and charts. Some people will use the tables, graphs, and charts at the same time. But in my opinion, or in my work, I always opt to use table and a chart, or table and a graph. So yes, you can and you should use them together. Then, so I'll first of all skip the tally. Someone asked about the mixed method. Yes, we discussed it at the beginning. The mixed method is a combination of both qualitative and quantitative. So in this case, if you're using the mixed method, you can have an inferential statistics of chi-square, like someone had asked earlier, because it allows you to have both qualitative and quantitative. Then Dr. asked about channeling the objective to the data analysis technique. So when you have your objective, the next step that you do is to come up with your research question. From your research question, you can tell which statistic to use. Another way you can do that is have your objective, then from the objective, come up with an hypothesis. Then from the hypothesis, it can tell you which type of analysis to use. Are you comparing means? So are you going to go the ANOVA way? Are you going to use the Z-test? Are you going to use the chi-square? So how you tell it's objective, the research question, the research hypothesis, then that guides you on the data analysis. If you're on the qualitative, it's objective, then the research question, then you can tell the data analysis. And I gave the example that we had for the using the extent and using the effect. So bringing in, if I come up, what is the extent of depression caused by social media? By using that question, it can tell it's a regression. What is the effect of social media on depression? Just using the effect, that should tell you that you're analyzing using correlation. So it's objective, question, hypothesis, data analysis technique. So there is someone who asked about challenges on self-report, and Madam Aurelia, I think you'll help me on that, because I do not really understand that question. Thank you. I think I've covered all the questions.
I think, was it JK? You can maybe elaborate further?
Yes, I can elaborate. What I was wondering is, when people are answering questionnaires, sometimes they're giving subjective, sometimes they can give subjective responses. And so, for example, you're asking them, how much time are you spending on social media? They're going to tell you, I spend an hour a day. And for them, that is what they think they do. But then, as I have been doing this research, I've come across many researchers who are saying, this is usually a challenge because 90% of the time, okay, 90% is an exaggeration maybe, but a huge chunk of the time, this self-report of I spend an hour on social media is not usually accurate. When you actually go back and look at the logs on their phones, you'll find either the number is higher or lower, and it will also be very different. They'll tell you I spend maybe 30 minutes on Facebook and 10 minutes on Instagram and some other place 5 minutes. But when you look at the log on the phone, the numbers are very different. It could be they spend 10 minutes on Facebook and then they spend an hour on Instagram, but they don't know that, like, they can't accurately give you that number. So that becomes a challenge when you are saying that people are spending this amount of time on a particular platform. So that is what I've seen, that is a challenge, that people don't really give you the right answer. So I'm wondering, because me going to, how do I even put this? For me to get accurate numbers, I would have to coach people on how, first of all, to check the log on their phone that shows them the amount of time that they spend on a platform. But that is not realistic, considering my survey is going to be online. I'm not going to come into contact with my participants at any point, and we have COVID. So I can't have them give me the accurate numbers. I'll have to let them guess. And so I'm wondering, how will I what challenges do you foresee by the time I get to my chapter 5 with my work? Like, I know that will be part of the limitations, but what challenges do you foresee, and what opinions do you think you have about how to overcome some of the challenges in a realistic way? I don't think there's going to be like an accurate answer of do this or the other, but maybe just opinions, I guess.
Okay. I think I now get you. And you already answered what I was thinking, because that is part of something that you have to put on your limitation. However, now this is a challenge that we have with quantitative, because it is factual. You take what you're given. You don't have the option to go and ask or probe or try them check that you do in qualitative. So what I would do, if you find that your research, that is in my opinion, if I find that my research is likely to have that challenge, then I could bring in the mixed approach, because the qualitative will now allow me to get down to them and probe and tell them, maybe check your, have that contact with the respondents. So because that is the power or the strength of qualitative. So then why don't you bring it in your research and make it a mixed approach? But if you want to stick with quantitative, then you have no other option but just to report what you're given, but put it down as a limitation. So that is what how I would approach it if I'm the one who's doing that research.
Awesome, thank you. I was thinking along the same lines. We have a similar mind. Thank you.
Excellent.
So Doreen, you were saying chi-square, you'd like to say? You'd like to unmute?
Thank you. I just wanted to add that chi-square test is usually used in quantitative studies, but then what it really applies when the dependent variable is categorical. So probably that's what the speaker was trying to refer to as being qualitative, because when the dependent variable is categorical, usually you can't count it. So that's just my contribution.
Thank you, Doreen. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you so
Welcome.
much. So as it is our custom, we will share the slides, we will share the recording, and we invite you. We always say the minute you attend a mentorship session like this one, you need to immediately go and start applying, so that you don't lose the momentum and sort of the insights that may have been triggered by what you have learned. So please do that, and so that every time you're moving onward with your work, you're not stagnating and then you have to attend another session to remember. So go on and get on with it. Start writing so that the momentum can be there. And those who are in the journal club, we will share there. Those who are not, let me just share how to join the link so that we can, that's where we share our recording and all that. And I think Stellah will share with us the recording, the slides, and we'll also put her email there so that you can contact her if you so wish. And yes, thank you so much, Stellah. Always a pleasure. Thank you for taking time to journey with us. And do you have any final words?
No, Aurelia, thank you for listening and thank you for this opportunity. I also learn a lot when I come here. I hope to be back again. Thank you very much.
You're always welcome. So it's good night, good morning, wherever you are, or good afternoon. Wish you well. You can leave at your own pleasure. Please fill in the feedback form so that we know maybe any other topic you're interested in or any other thing that was not clear. Please fill in the feedback form. The link is on the chat. Bye. Bye-bye. See you guys. I'm now closing. Have you checked the feedback form? Just go to the link. It always helps us. That's how we get topics to present. So bye-bye and see you soon.